The morning I received the cease and desist letter from the Homeowners Association, I was standing in my kitchen drinking coffee that had been heated with water from my solar panels. The irony was not lost on me as I read through the legal jargon demanding I remove the panels within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. My name is Trevor Henderson, and I had moved to Pinehurst Estates in Charlotte, North Carolina just 8 months earlier. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter suburban developments where every third house looked identical and the lawns were measured with rulers. But the price was right, and after my divorce, I needed a fresh start somewhere affordable. The house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a decent yard, and most importantly, it faced south, which was perfect for the solar thermal panels I had installed 3 months ago. Those panels were not just some environmental statement, they were a necessity. My heating bills during the previous winter had been astronomical, nearly $400 a month just to keep the place livable. The solar panels heated my water, which fed into my home heating system, cutting my utility costs by more than half. I had saved up for months to afford the installation, and the payback period would be just under 4 years. The letter was signed by Patricia Pemberton, president of the Pinehurst Estates HOA. I had met Patricia exactly once, during the closing on my house. She was a woman in her mid-50s with helmet-like blonde hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She had handed me a thick binder of HOA rules and told me to familiarize myself with them. I had skimmed through, noting the usual stuff about lawn maintenance and paint colors, but nowhere had I seen anything about solar panels. I pulled out that binder now, my hands shaking slightly with anger as I flipped through page after page. There it was, buried in Section 12, subsection F. No external modifications to the roof or exterior walls may be made without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. My stomach dropped. I had not requested approval. The solar installer had asked if I needed HOA permission, and I had checked the rules, but somehow I had missed this section entirely. But that was not even the worst part. The letter claimed that my solar panels were an eyesore that diminished property values and violated the aesthetic standards of the community. I looked out my kitchen window at the panels on my roof. They were sleek, black, and barely visible from the street. Meanwhile, 3 houses down, Roger Kimball had a rusted basketball hoop in his driveway that had been there since I moved in. And 2 streets over, someone had painted their shutters a garish purple that could be seen from space. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, so I called my real estate lawyer, Marcus Chen. Marcus had handled my house purchase and was the kind of attorney who actually returned phone calls. "Trevor, hey," Marcus said when he picked up. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, reading him portions of the letter. He was quiet for a moment. "Did you get approval before installation?" he asked. "No, I missed that section in the rules. But Marcus, these panels are saving me hundreds of dollars a month. And North Carolina has solar access laws, right?" "It does," Marcus said slowly. North Carolina General Statute 22B20 prevents HOAs from completely prohibiting solar panels, but there's wiggle room for reasonable restrictions. The question is whether your HOA's rules constitute a reasonable restriction or an effective prohibition. They are demanding I remove them entirely. That seems like a prohibition to me. I agree. Look, you have a few options here. You can apply for retroactive approval and hope they grant it. You can fight this based on the solar access law, or you can remove them and eat the cost. What do you want to do? "I want to fight," I said immediately. "I cannot afford to remove them and pay those heating bills again. Plus, this is ridiculous. The panels are not hurting anyone. Okay, Marcus said. First step is to request a hearing with the HOA board. You are entitled to that before they can start fining you. I will draft a response letter. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos of your panels from every angle, especially from the street view. Get your utility bills together to show the cost savings. And start looking around the neighborhood for any other violations they are ignoring. If we can show selective enforcement, that helps our case. I spent the rest of that Saturday photographing my house and driving through Pinehurst Estates with my phone camera. What I found was illuminating. The neighborhood was full of violations of the HOA rules. Untrimmed hedges, houses with chipped paint, a boat parked in someone's side yard covered with a tarp, satellite dishes on roofs, an above-ground pool that was clearly visible from the street. I documented everything with timestamps and addresses. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with Marcus, a folder full of documentation, and a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The clubhouse was a bland beige building with a small gym and a meeting room that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Patricia Pemberton was already there, seated at a long table with 4 other board members. She wore a cream-colored blazer and pearls, her expression conveying the same warmth as a tax audit. To her right sat Donald Fletcher, the vice president, a bald man in his 60s who looked perpetually confused. The other 3 board members I recognized from the neighborhood but had never spoken to: Helen Wu, James Cartwright, and Sandra Morrison. "Mr. Henderson," Patricia said as I walked in, not bothering to stand. "Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." Marcus and I sat in the 2 chairs facing the board. It felt like a tribunal. "I assume you received our letter regarding the unauthorized installation on your property," Patricia continued. "I did," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I would like to discuss it. These are solar thermal panels that heat my water and help with home heating. They are saving me significant money on utilities, and they comply with North Carolina state law regarding solar installations." Patricia's smile was thin. "Mr. Henderson, we are not questioning the functionality of your installation. We are concerned with the aesthetics. Pinehurst Estates is a planned community with certain standards. When homeowners purchase here, they agree to maintain those standards. Your panels are visible from the street, and they do not match the character of the neighborhood. With all due respect, Mrs. Pemberton, I have driven through this neighborhood extensively in the past few days. There are numerous violations of the HOA rules that are far more visible than my panels. I have documentation of at least 15 properties with various issues, some of which have existed for months or years." I started to pull out my folder, but Patricia held up a hand. "Other violations are not relevant to this hearing. We are here to discuss your property." Marcus leaned forward. "Actually, selective enforcement is absolutely relevant. If the HOA is ignoring multiple violations while targeting my client specifically, that raises questions about the motivation and fairness of this action. Additionally, North Carolina General Statute 22B20 specifically prevents HOAs from prohibiting solar installations. By demanding complete removal, you may be in violation of state law." Donald Fletcher spoke up for the first time, his voice reedy. "We are not prohibiting solar panels entirely. We simply want them moved to a location where they are not visible from the street." "There is no such location on my property," I said. "The panels have to face south to be effective. The southern exposure of my roof is the only viable location. Moving them would make them useless." "That is not our problem," Patricia said. You should have considered that before installing them without permission. I made a mistake not getting approval, I admitted, but I am here now, asking for retroactive approval. These panels are a reasonable modification that provides substantial benefit and minimal visual impact. They are black, they lie flat against the roof, and they are barely noticeable. I have photographs showing the street view. I spread out several photos on the table. The panels were indeed hard to spot unless you were looking directly at them. Helen Wu picked up one of the photos, studying it. I actually think these look quite nice. Very modern. My sister has solar panels in California and they look much more obtrusive than these. Patricia shot her a look that could have frozen water. Helen, the issue is not whether they look nice to you personally. The issue is that they were installed without approval and they set a precedent. If we allow this, what is next? Everyone will want to make modifications without asking. Or, Marcus interjected, you could establish a reasonable process for approving solar installations that complies with state law and allows homeowners to reduce their energy costs. That seems like a win for everyone. We already have a process, Sandra Morrison said. She was a thin woman with severe features who had not spoken until now. The process is to request approval before making modifications. Mr. Henderson did not follow the process. You are right, I did not, I said, and I apologize for that. But we are here now, and I am formally requesting approval. Can we discuss the possibility of allowing the panels to remain? Patricia glanced at the other board members, then back at me. We will take your request under advisement. The board will vote and notify you of our decision within 10 business days. This hearing is concluded. That is it, I asked, standing. You are not even going to discuss it now. We will discuss it in executive session, Patricia said. You will receive our decision in writing. Marcus and I walked out into the parking lot under the dim streetlights. The November air was crisp and smelled like someone was burning leaves nearby. What do you think? I asked. I think Patricia Pemberton has already made up her mind, and she is going to push the board to deny your request. But we knew that coming in. The question is whether the other board members will go along with it. Did you notice Helen seemed sympathetic? Yeah, but it is 5 votes. We need 3 on our side. We need to be prepared for them to deny this, Marcus said. If they do, we will file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and consider litigation based on the solar access law. It will be expensive and time-consuming, but you have a decent case. The decision letter arrived 12 days later, not 10. It was brief and impersonal. After careful consideration, the Architectural Review Committee and HOA Board have voted to deny your request for retroactive approval of the solar panel installation. You have 20 days to remove the installation or daily fines of $500 will commence as previously stated. I called Marcus immediately. They denied it. Okay. We are going to file a complaint and send them a letter invoking the solar access statute. I will get that out today. In the meantime, do not remove those panels. The next week, things escalated. A new letter arrived, this time from a law firm in Charlotte representing the HOA. The tone was aggressive, threatening immediate legal action if I did not comply. Marcus responded with our own legal letter, citing the state statute and documenting the selective enforcement issues. Then, I started receiving anonymous notes in my mailbox. The first one was printed on plain white paper. Remove the panels or you will regret it. The second, 2 days later, you are ruining our neighborhood. The third was more direct. Nobody wants you here. I reported the notes to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, but the officer who took my report seemed bored. It is probably just someone in your neighborhood being a jerk, he said. Not much we can do unless it becomes threatening. Keep the notes and let us know if it escalates." It escalated. On a Tuesday morning in early December, I woke to find that someone had egged my house during the night. White and yellow streaks dripped down my siding and windows. My mailbox had been knocked over and someone had spray-painted "Solar Loser" on my driveway in red paint. This time, the police took it more seriously. A detective came out, took photos and a detailed report. My neighbor to the left, an elderly woman named Grace Turner, told the detective she had heard something around 2 in the morning but had not looked out. "You have any security cameras?" the detective asked. "No, I never thought I would need them." "You might want to get some." This kind of harassment usually does not stop on its own. I installed 2 security cameras that afternoon, one covering the front of the house and one on the side where the driveway was. The installation cost me $300 I could not really afford, but I needed to know who was targeting me. Meanwhile, the 20-day deadline had passed. I received another letter from the HOA, this one informing me that daily fines of $500 had commenced, and that a lien would be placed on my property if I did not pay within 30 days. The math was staggering. If this continued for 30 days, I would owe $15,000. Marcus filed an emergency motion in Mecklenburg County Superior Court, seeking an injunction to stop the fines while we litigated the solar access issue. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the fines kept accumulating. My stress level was through the roof. I was barely sleeping, constantly checking my security cameras and jumping at every sound. My job as an IT consultant was suffering because I could not concentrate. My boss called me in for a conversation about my performance, and I had to explain the situation. To his credit, he was understanding but also made it clear that I needed to get my focus back. On a Friday night, 2 weeks after installing the cameras, I got an alert on my phone. Someone was in my yard. I pulled up the camera feed and saw a figure in dark clothing approaching my house. My heart hammered as I dialed 911 and watched the screen. The figure was carrying something, moving toward my front door. The 911 operator kept me on the line while dispatching officers. On the screen, I watched the figure dump something on my porch and then spray paint something on my front door. They turned to leave just as police lights appeared at the end of my street. The figure ran, cutting through my backyard. Police flooded the area. They did not catch the person, who had disappeared into the darkness, but they documented everything. My front door had been spray painted with the words "Move Out." The substance dumped on my porch turned out to be motor oil mixed with trash. "Did your cameras get a clear image?" one of the officers asked. We reviewed the footage together. The person had worn a hood and a mask, making identification impossible, but there was something about the build and the gait that seemed familiar. "You have any idea who might be doing this?" the officer asked. "I am in a dispute with my HOA about solar panels. I have been getting threatening notes. I think it is related to that." The officer took down all the information about the HOA situation. "You should know that if this is connected to the HOA, there could be criminal charges involved. Destruction of property, harassment, possibly stalking depending on how this plays out. Make sure you keep all documentation." The next morning, exhausted and furious, I decided to do something I probably should have done earlier. I went door to door in my neighborhood, explaining my situation and asking if anyone had seen or heard anything. Most people were sympathetic, but had nothing useful to offer. But then I knocked on the door of Richard Park, who lived 4 houses down. Richard was a software engineer in his 30s, casually dressed in jeans and a college sweatshirt. "Oh man, I have been wanting to talk to you about your solar panels," he said. I am really interested in getting some. How much did they save you? I explained the cost savings and the situation with the HOA. Richard's expression darkened. Patricia Pemberton is something else, man. She tried to fine me last year because my grass was half an inch too long during a week when I was out of town for work. I had to go to a hearing and everything. She has it out for anyone she perceives as not fitting her vision for the neighborhood. Do you know if she has been talking about me? Oh, absolutely. She has been complaining about your panels at every board meeting. I go sometimes, just to keep tabs on what they are up to. She called them an abomination at the last meeting, said they were setting a dangerous precedent and that she would do whatever it took to get them removed. Whatever it took, Richard shrugged. Her words, not mine. Look, I do not want to make accusations, but Patricia is pretty extreme about HOA stuff. It is like her entire identity. You might want to look into her background. I thanked Richard and went home to do exactly that. A few hours of internet searching revealed some interesting information about Patricia Pemberton. Before moving to Pinehurst Estates 5 years ago, she had been the HOA president of another neighborhood in nearby Huntersville. That HOA had been sued by multiple homeowners for excessive fines and selective enforcement. Patricia had eventually been removed from the board after accusations of financial impropriety, though no criminal charges were filed. I sent all this information to Marcus, who found it very interesting indeed. The court hearing for our injunction request finally arrived on a cold December morning. Marcus and I sat in the courtroom waiting for our case to be called. Patricia Pemberton was there with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking guy named Bradford Stillwell. Judge Margaret Hoffman, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the briefs before beginning. Mr. Chen, you are seeking an emergency injunction to stop HOA fines against your client. Explain your position. Marcus stood. Your Honor, my client installed solar thermal panels on his home to reduce heating costs. These panels have cut his utility bills by more than half. The HOA is demanding complete removal and has begun assessing fines of $500 per day. However, North Carolina General Statute 22B20 specifically prevents HOAs from prohibiting solar installations. We believe the HOA's actions violate this statute and that the fines are punitive and unreasonable. Bradford Stillwell responded, Your Honor, the HOA is not prohibiting solar panels. We simply require that they be placed in locations where they are not visible from the street, in accordance with our architectural standards. Mr. Henderson installed these panels without requesting approval, in violation of the HOA covenants he agreed to when he purchased his home. Judge Hoffman looked at me. Mr. Henderson, why did you not request approval before installation? I stood nervously. Your Honor, I made a mistake. I reviewed the HOA rules but missed the section requiring approval. However, I am willing to work with the HOA. The problem is that there is no location on my property where the panels would be effective, except where they currently are. They need southern exposure. The HOA's position effectively prohibits solar panels on my home, which I believe violates the state statute. The judge nodded and turned to Stillwell. Counsel, if the southern roof is the only viable location for effective solar panels, and your HOA prohibits panels visible from the street, are you not effectively prohibiting solar panels? Not at all, Your Honor. Mr. Henderson could install panels in his backyard, perhaps on a ground mount. That would cost thousands of dollars more and would take up my entire backyard, I said. It is not a reasonable alternative. Judge Hoffman reviewed some documents, then looked up. I am going to grant a temporary injunction stopping the fines while this matter is litigated. However, Mr. Henderson, you need to understand that you did violate the HOA covenants by not requesting approval. That is going to be a factor in the final decision. I am also going to order mediation between the parties to see if we can resolve this without a full trial. My clerk will schedule that. Does everyone understand? We all agreed. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety. The fines were stopped for now, but this was far from over. The mediation was scheduled for early January. In the meantime, the holidays arrived, and the tension in Pinehurst Estates was thick enough to cut with a knife. Someone started a Facebook group called Pinehurst Estates Homeowners that turned into a battleground. Some people supported my right to have solar panels. Others, clearly influenced by Patricia, ranted about property values and community standards. Then, on December 28th, my security cameras captured something important. At 11 p.m., a car pulled up slowly in front of my house. Someone got out, walked up to my mailbox, and put something inside. The person was wearing a coat and hood, but as they walked back to the car, they pulled the hood down for just a moment. The camera caught a clear image of her face, Patricia Pemberton. I immediately downloaded the footage and sent it to both Marcus and the police. When I checked my mailbox, I found another threatening note. Last chance. Remove the panels or face the consequences. Detective Sarah Morrison, who had been handling my harassment case, came by the next morning to review the footage. That is definitely her, she said. This is enough for me to bring her in for questioning. Harassment, intimidation, possibly stalking. I will need to get a warrant, but this is solid evidence. What about the vandalism? Can you connect her to that? The vandalism is harder to prove since the person was masked. But if she admits to the notes, and we can establish a pattern of harassment related to the HOA dispute, we might be able to make a case. Let me work on this. 2 days later, Patricia Pemberton was arrested at her home and charged with harassment and criminal mischief. The news spread through Pinehurst Estates like wildfire. The Facebook group exploded with comments, about half supporting Patricia and claiming this was all a misunderstanding, and half expressing shock and calling for her resignation from the HOA board. The HOA held an emergency meeting to address the situation. Donald Fletcher, as vice president, took over as acting president. I attended the meeting, which was packed with residents. We are here to discuss the situation with Mrs. Pemberton, Donald began, looking overwhelmed. The board has decided that she will step down temporarily while these charges are pending. In the meantime, we need to address the issue with Mr. Henderson's solar panels. Why is this even an issue? Someone shouted from the crowd. Richard Park, my ally. The guy is trying to save money on his heating bills. Since when is that a crime? It is about maintaining standards, Sandra Morrison said. If we let everyone do whatever they want, property values will suffer. Or maybe property values will go up because people can save money on utilities, someone else called out. The meeting devolved into chaos with people shouting over each other. Finally, Donald banged a gavel and called for order. Here is what we are going to do, he said. We are going to put this to a vote of the entire HOA membership. Let everyone decide whether to allow solar panels in Pinehurst Estates. We will draft new guidelines and hold a vote within 30 days. That seemed to calm things down. The mediation session, the following week, was much more productive with Patricia not involved. Donald and the other board members, particularly Helen Wu, were willing to negotiate. Marcus and I proposed revised HOA guidelines that would allow solar panels with certain aesthetic requirements. They had to be flush-mounted, similar in color to the roof, and installed by licensed professionals. After 3 hours of discussion, we reached an agreement. The HOA would adopt new solar panel guidelines. I would be granted retroactive approval for my installation, and all fines would be permanently waived. In exchange, I agreed to drop any potential legal claims against the HOA. The vote of the full HOA membership happened in February. Out of 143 households, 97 voted in favor of the new guidelines, 34 voted against, and 12 abstained. It was not even close. My solar panels were staying, but the story was not over. Patricia Pemberton's criminal case moved forward. Detective Morrison had been thorough in her investigation. She had obtained Patricia's phone records and found evidence that Patricia had been coordinating with 2 other residents, both friends of hers, to harass me. The vandalism on my property had been carried out by Patricia's son, Bradley Pemberton, a 23-year-old who still lived with his mother. Bradley was arrested in March and charged with criminal mischief, destruction of property, and conspiracy. When confronted with evidence including receipts for the spray paint purchased with his credit card, Bradley confessed and implicated his mother in planning the attacks. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she had been under stress and had acted irrationally, but the evidence was overwhelming. In April, Patricia pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, harassment, and intimidation. She was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my property, which totaled nearly $4,500. Bradley received a similar sentence, with the judge noting that both mother and son had engaged in a calculated campaign of harassment over a civil dispute that could have been resolved peacefully. The sentencing hearing was surreal. I sat in the courtroom watching Patricia Pemberton, who had always projected such authority and control, break down crying as the judge pronounced sentence. Part of me felt bad for her. She had become so obsessed with controlling the neighborhood that she had destroyed her own life. But mostly, I felt relief that this nightmare was finally over. In the months that followed, Pinehurst Estates changed significantly. Donald Fletcher decided not to run for HOA president again, saying he preferred a quiet life. Helen Wu took over as president and immediately began reforming how the HOA operated. She established clear procedures for requesting modifications, created an online portal for submitting requests, and instituted training for board members on state and federal housing laws. More importantly, 3 other homeowners installed solar panels within 6 months of the new guidelines being adopted. Richard Park was the first, and he sent me a thank you note saying I had paved the way. A young couple, the Mitchells, installed panels in July. An elderly Frank Diaz, who lived on a fixed income, installed them in September, telling me that the energy savings would make a huge difference in his retirement budget. My own life gradually returned to normal, though the experience had changed me. I became more involved in the neighborhood, attending HOA meetings regularly to make sure things stayed on track. I also started a neighborhood watch program with Richard and several others, which helped build community in a way the HOA never had. The security cameras stayed up, but I stopped checking them obsessively. The threatening notes and vandalism never returned. My house was repaired and repainted. The spray paint came off the driveway with some effort and industrial cleaner. My utility bills remained low through the following winter. The solar panels worked exactly as advertised, cutting my heating costs by more than half just as they had the first year. Every time I looked at my utility bill, I thought about how close I had come to losing those panels and how different things could have turned out. I ran into Patricia's husband, George Pemberton, at the grocery store in November, almost a full year after this had all started. He looked tired and aged, carrying a basket with just a few items. We made eye contact briefly. He nodded and I nodded back. There was nothing to say. His wife was out of jail by then, having served her 6 months, but they kept to themselves and Patricia was never seen at HOA events again. The legal bills from the entire ordeal cost me about $8,000, even with Marcus giving me a significant discount. The security cameras were $300. The repairs to my property, even with restitution from Patricia, cost me another $1,000 out of pocket. But the solar panels continued to save me about $200 a month, and over time, everything would balance out. More than the money, though, the experience taught me about standing up for what was right. It would have been easier to remove the panels and back down when Patricia first sent that cease and desist letter. But I would have spent years paying higher utility bills and knowing I had let a bully win. The neighborhood learned something too. At a HOA meeting in December, Helen Wu gave a short speech reflecting on the past year. "We came very close to tearing this community apart over something that should have been simple," she said. "Patricia let her desire for control override common sense and basic decency. We cannot let that happen again. An HOA exists to serve homeowners, not to rule over them. We need to remember that going forward." There was applause from the assembled residents, and for the first time since moving to Pinehurst Estates, I felt like I was actually part of a community, rather than just living in a collection of houses that happened to be near each other. Richard Park and I became good friends through all of this. We started having regular backyard barbecues where neighbors could gather informally. These became more popular than any official HOA event ever had been. People appreciated the casual atmosphere and the chance to actually get to know each other. Richard also turned out to be instrumental in another change. He was tech-savvy and proposed that the HOA adopt software to manage requests and communications more transparently. Helen approved the idea, and within a few months, homeowners could submit modification requests online, track their status, and see what other requests had been approved or denied. The transparency made a huge difference in reducing conflicts. I started documenting my experience in a blog, writing about the importance of solar access laws and how HOAs needed to balance aesthetic concerns with homeowner rights. The blog got picked up by a few sustainable living websites, and I did a couple of podcast interviews. It was strange to suddenly be an advocate for something I had just stumbled into through necessity, but it felt meaningful to help others avoid what I had gone through. One family in Texas reached out to say that my blog had helped them fight their HOA's solar panel ban. They cited North Carolina's law and similar statutes in Texas to successfully get their panels approved. Knowing I had helped someone else made all the stress worthwhile. The following spring, I was approached by the local news to do a story about solar panels and HOA disputes. The segment aired on a Saturday evening, featuring footage of my panels, interviews with me and Helen Wu, and discussion of how Pinehurst Estates had evolved. Patricia's case was mentioned briefly, but the focus was on the positive changes that had resulted. After the segment aired, I received a call from my ex-wife, Jennifer. We had not spoken in over a year, our divorce having been amicable but final. "I saw you on the news," she said. "I am proud of you, Trevor. You always had a tendency to avoid conflict, but you really stood up for yourself this time." It was a strange compliment, but she was right. The old me would have removed the panels to avoid trouble. The person I had become through this experience was stronger and more willing to fight for what mattered. By the second winter after installing the panels, my life had fully stabilized. The heating season arrived, and once again, my utility bills stayed manageable thanks to the solar thermal system. I had coffee with Frank Diaz, the elderly neighbor who had installed panels inspired by my situation, and he told me he was saving almost $300 a month during peak winter. For someone on Social Security, that was life-changing money. The Pinehurst Estates HOA under Helen Wu's leadership became something of a model for how to run a homeowners association properly. A regional HOA management conference invited Helen to speak about conflict resolution and transparent governance. She asked if I would come along to share my perspective as a homeowner who had been through a serious dispute. I agreed, and we presented together to a room full of HOA board members and property managers. During the question and answer session, one HOA president asked, "But what about maintaining standards? If you let people do whatever they want, does not the neighborhood go downhill?" I answered before Helen could. There is a difference between reasonable standards and arbitrary control. My solar panels are black, flush-mounted, barely visible from the street, and they provide a tangible benefit. They hurt no one and help me significantly. When an HOA focuses on actual maintenance issues like overgrown yards or exterior damage, people generally support that. When an HOA tries to control every little detail and prevent reasonable modifications, you get conflict and resentment. The question is not about standards, it is about what actually matters. The room was quiet for a moment, then several people nodded. One woman raised her hand and said, "We have been fighting a similar issue with a homeowner who wants to install a ramp for wheelchair access. Your situation has given me a different perspective. Thank you." Walking out of that conference, I realized that something genuinely good had come from all the stress and conflict. Yes, it had been a nightmare dealing with Patricia Pemberton and the harassment and the legal battles. But the result was positive change that extended beyond just my situation. The final piece of closure came in March, 2 full years after I had first installed the solar panels. I received a letter in the mail from Patricia Pemberton. My first instinct was alarm, wondering what new problem was emerging. But when I opened it, I found a handwritten note. "Mr. Henderson," it read, "I owe you an apology. My behavior toward you was inexcusable. I became obsessed with control and lost perspective on what actually mattered. I allowed my own issues to manifest as harassment and cruelty toward you. You were simply trying to reduce your utility bills and be environmentally conscious. You did nothing wrong. I am deeply sorry for the pain and stress I caused you. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive me someday. I have spent my time in jail and probation reflecting on my actions. I am in therapy now, working on understanding why I behaved so badly. I wanted you to know that I take full responsibility. Sincerely, Patricia Pemberton." I sat at my kitchen table reading the letter 3 times. It felt genuine. Whether I would ever actually forgive her, I was not sure, but the apology meant something. It meant she understood what she had done and was trying to be better. That was more than many people in her situation would do. I wrote a brief response. "Mrs. Pemberton, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your apology and your willingness to take responsibility. What happened was difficult, but it led to positive changes in our community. I hope you find peace and move forward in a good way. Trevor Henderson." I mailed the letter and felt something release inside me. The anger and anxiety I had carried for so long began to finally fade. It was over. Really, truly over. That summer, I started dating someone I met through a mutual friend. Her name was Olivia Eastman, and she worked as an environmental consultant. When I told her about the solar panel saga, she laughed and said, "You are kind of a hero in the solar advocacy world. I read about your case." We bonded over shared interests in sustainability and practical problem solving, and she appreciated that I had stood up to an unreasonable HOA. Olivia moved in with me that fall, and one of the first things she did was suggest we add a small solar array for electricity in addition to the thermal panels for hot water. I was hesitant at first, given everything I had been through, but the new HOA guidelines made the process straightforward. We submitted a request. Helen approved it within 2 weeks, and we installed the electric panels in November. Our combined utility savings were now approaching $350 a month. The house was comfortable and efficient, and I no longer felt a spike of anxiety every time winter arrived. Richard Park joked that I should run for HOA president. I politely declined. I had no desire to be in charge of the organization, but I did agree to serve on the Architectural Review Committee, helping evaluate requests for modifications. My experience gave me perspective on balancing homeowner needs with reasonable community standards. In that role, I helped approve requests for everything from garden sheds to deck additions to, yes, more solar panels. By the end of my 3rd year in Pinehurst Estates, 7 households had solar installations of various types. The neighborhood had not descended into chaos. Property values had actually increased slightly, in part because buyers liked the progressive approach to sustainable modifications. I never did recover all the money I spent on legal fees and repairs, but the solar panels paid for themselves within 5 years, just a year longer than I had originally calculated. After that, every dollar saved was pure benefit. Over a 20-year lifespan, the panels would save me somewhere around $50,000 in utility costs. That was a legacy worth fighting for. Looking back on everything that happened, I was grateful for the support I received from people like Marcus Chen, Helen Wu, Richard Park, and Detective Sarah Morrison. I was grateful that the legal system, while slow, ultimately worked correctly. I was grateful that North Carolina had solar access laws that protected homeowners like me from unreasonable HOA restrictions. Most of all, I was grateful that I had stood up for myself when it would have been easier to back down. That decision changed not just my life, but improved the entire community. Other homeowners had more freedom, the HOA operated more fairly, and people who wanted to make sustainable choices could do so without fear of harassment. On a cold January morning, 3 years after this whole saga began, I stood in my kitchen drinking coffee made with water heated by my solar panels. Olivia was still asleep upstairs. The neighborhood was quiet under a light dusting of snow. My utility bill for the month would be under $80 despite the freezing temperatures outside. I pulled out my phone and looked at the security camera feeds, something I still did occasionally out of habit more than necessity. The street was empty except for a few cars parked in driveways. Everything was peaceful. Patricia Pemberton had moved out of Pinehurst Estates about 6 months earlier. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and George had bought a condo in Florida, somewhere with no HOA or at least one she was not involved with. I hoped she was doing better, that she had learned from her mistakes and found some peace. The solar panels on my roof continued doing their job silently and efficiently, converting sunlight into heat, reducing my environmental impact and my monthly expenses. They were just panels, just equipment, but they represented something larger: the right to make reasonable choices about my own home, the importance of standing up to bullies, and the value of community when it functions properly. I finished my coffee and started getting ready for work. It was just another day in Pinehurst Estates, quiet and normal in the best possible way. The drama was behind us. The neighborhood had healed. Life had moved on. And every month, when I paid my utility bill and saw those savings, I smiled and thought about how close I came to giving up and how glad I was that I did not. The solar panels stayed. I stayed. And Pinehurst Estates became a better place because of it. That was worth everything I had been through.